Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering the Tzeentch Unit Roster, which we have done in the past, but there's a whole bunch of new units here to cover, and we're going to be covering the Shadows of Change DLC units as well. So before we get started into the actual tier list itself, this video is of course sponsored by Manscaped. So you guys know I've been partnered with Manscaped for ages now, and I've been using their products this entire time. I even used the Lawnmower 4.0, which is essentially a ball shaver, to shave my face, because honestly it was just better than the previous razor I had before. Well, they've just introduced their newest product called the Handyman, and this is actually designed for shaving your face. And having used it, it gave the closest shave I've ever had from an electric razor. So I'll be using that instead of my Lawnmower 4.0. So if you're interested in this product, keep in mind as well that next month is Father's Day. These do make really good presents. Check out the link in the description below and get 20% off plus free international shipping. Big thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Alright, with that being said, let's jump into the tier list itself. It's really important that we quantify exactly what we're doing here, and that this is a campaign tier list. So there is a difference in how units will be utilized in battle on campaign compared to multiplayer, because when it comes to multiplayer, you just recruit whatever you feel like and just pay whatever is needed. And in campaign, there are other factors that can make units that were otherwise low value a lot higher value, based on things like technologies, by Lord skill trees, and landmarks, what buildings they're recruited from, how long they take to recruit, how convenient it is to recruit these units. So units that might be low value in multiplayer could end up having high value in single player, and also vice versa. So I just want to make that clear, and that I really don't focus whatsoever on the multiplayer. So if you're using these tier lists to build your multiplayer builds, I would highly advise against doing that. But I'll be as specific as possible when it comes to what makes something high value on the campaign map. Starting with the blue horrors over here, I'm going to put this one at A tier. Now, once again, the stats of a unit is not what brings it up to S tier or D tier. It's about a whole bunch of factors about how valuable a unit is to you on the campaign map. If we only put the high stat units up high and the low stat units down low, anybody could do that tier list and it will have absolutely no value whatsoever, because you may actually end up recruiting bad units that will ruin your campaign. Because some units in the game have high stats and have nothing to offer you on the battlefield. Stats is not the only thing that you should look at. Stats are important, don't get me wrong. A unit that has higher melee attack and melee defense will obviously beat something in melee that has lower stats in that regard. But there are oftentimes a lot of other factors, especially when it comes to Tzeentch, who is pulling bullshit throughout the campaign. Certain units will be able to complement that bullshit a lot better than others. Now, when it comes to said bullshit, blue horrors of Tzeentch complement that bullshit quite a lot, because these are a cheap unit that's very easy to replace. Your early game options are not super strong for Tzeentch, but this is a really convenient unit because you don't require a barracks. You'll be able to globally recruit it in one turn fairly early on. As soon as you get to 10 settlements, you'll be able to recruit it in one turn globally. They're cheap. They're boosted significantly in the tech tree. They've got something that increases their amount of ammunition by 25% for all the horrors. And with the new update coming with the DLC, if you get the blue scribe of Tzeentch, the new legendary hero, this particular character is able to boost the barrier and ammunition of horrors by a ridiculous amount, making blue horrors jump way up in how strong they are. And in fact, if you're attaching the blue scribe of Tzeentch to an army where you're using blue horrors, I would even argue that they can go up to S tier. However, since it also does it for these units here, I would highly advise doing it to them instead. So if we were to pop these in here, I'm going to put all three of them under A tier. Now, when it comes down to the pink horrors, the two variants of it, this is a tier 2 unit, this is a tier 3 unit. Now, the reason this isn't entering S tier is due to its 2-turn recruit time. That makes it significantly longer to get them. Now, when it comes down to 1-turn recruitment compared to 2 turns, there's a big difference with that, because if it's 1-turn recruitment, you can move at the beginning of your turn, and then you've exhausted all your movement, then recruit. But when it comes to 2-turn recruitment, you can move, then recruit, and then the next turn you have to stand completely still until your recruitment's finished. meaning that your army will essentially move half as fast as it otherwise would have, whereas one-turn recruitment can actually not interrupt you whatsoever, except for the fact if you want to recruit and use like other stances such as channeling or force march, you're just not going to be able to recruit anyone in that case. Meaning that regular pink horrors are a little bit more convenient to recruit, but when it comes to the Exalted Pink Horrors, they are just straight up better units than these ones here. But they don't enter S tier because I don't believe that this should be a 2-turn recruit locally unit, and that's why they enter that. But if you've got the Blue Scribe of Tzeentch, you can get a lot of value out of this unit. You turn it into quite a super strong unit. Okay, then we've got the sort of mortal units now, and there's a lot more mortal units, especially after the Champions of Chaos DLC. I remember when Warhammer 3 first came out, Tzeentch was really limited in its mortal roster. They basically just had the Forsaken of Tzeentch, and then that was basically it. But they've got a lot more now. Oh, and the Knights. Okay, so regular Marauders. Now this here is a tier 2 unit. This one, these 4 units here are all recruited from the same building at the same tier, but they are not of the same quality. So this one I'm actually going to put under D tier. You really shouldn't bother recruiting this unit at all. It doesn't serve any purpose. It's just a cheap unit. You don't get it at tier 1 where it really should be. And the Blue Horrors of Tzeentch are just as good, and this one's got a missile attack. The only really advantage that a mortal has over a demon is that if they are going to break, they don't just instantly die the way that Blue Horrors do. But it's just an easier unit to replace. And if you've got that building, you really just shouldn't get this one because you've got better options. They are cheap in terms of upkeep cost, but not cheap enough, I think, to warrant overlooking them over the other ones. Now, when it comes to the Marauder Spearmen, I think that they're slightly higher value because anti-large is pretty important to Tzeentch. You have limited options, especially in the early game, for anti-large, and especially if you're playing as Kairos Fateweaver, you're really going to want as much anti-large as possible to hold that line. So these guys here are better at holding the line because they've got more melee defense than them, and you can substitute the Blue Horrors for these guys here for holding the line. So that's why I'm going to put them on the C tier, because I think they're slightly better. But that being said, I still don't think they're amazing units. Then you've got Forsaken of Tzeentch. This is a tier 2 unit. It's got a decent amount of armor. It's got Frenzy. It can dish out a significant amount of damage in melee. These are pretty decent melee infantry. So I'm going to put this one under B tier, because you can get a fair bit of value out of it. Now, the new unit, in the Shadow of Change DLC, you've got the Tzeentch. So this is a tier 2 unit. And it kind of fulfills the exact same role as the Forsaken of Tzeentch. But I'll talk about the various differences. It really comes down to stats with these two. And in terms of utility, they're basically the same. They're both mortal units in that they're not demons, they don't disintegrate. They both have about the same armor. These guys here have shields, so if you're going up against a lot of missile units, these guys here will be of higher value. The Forsaken are faster than Tzeentch. The Tzeentch have a special skill where the more spells that you cast throughout the battle, their weapon strength will increase up to 20%, which I kind of feel just isn't very significant. I feel like if it was up to 50%, maybe that would warrant them being recruited over the Forsaken, but their base damage is 30, so you can get up to 36. But these guys here have Frenzy, which already gives them a weapon strength boost, and they're, again, we're talking about stats here, which is the only real difference between these two. These guys here have nearly 60 weapon strength to begin with. These guys have higher melee attack than the Tzeentch, but the Tzeentch have higher melee defense. So again, you're just juggling stats with these two units. They're going to perform roughly about the same. Tzeentch are a little bit cheaper in terms of upkeep as well. But if you're going to recruit anything from that tier 2 building, it would be these two, and I would overlook the Marauders. There isn't a tier 1 like mortal construction building, so that's where these guys here belonged. There's just no reason to recruit them. Okay, then we've got the Spawn of Tzeentch, which is recruited at the tier 3 sort of mortal recruitment area, so the tier above where these guys are. Now, the Spawn of Tzeentch, I've not been very fond of Spawn throughout the course of Total War Warhammer 1, 2, and 3. In the case of Village the Curseling, Spawn of Tzeentch is actually really handy because he boosts them by so much, but there is no Monogod Tzeentch character that does anything with spawn of Tzeentch, except for the Changeling, but the Changeling has got other things going for him, so I wouldn't really bother with it. So I'm going to put this under D tier. It's a unit that you can skip in your campaigns and not worry about it whatsoever. It's just not an important unit. It doesn't really fulfill any important roles. It's unbreakable, which is fine. It dishes out okay damage, but damage dealing is not a problem for Tzeentch. Tzeentch is a very high damage dealing faction. But them being bigger than these other mortal units also means that they're quite susceptible to missiles, which is something that Tzeentch will oftentimes go up against. So I just don't think that they're a particularly good unit. But I'd maybe consider putting them borderline C, just on my personal preference. I just don't think they have much value to you on the battlefield. Okay, at least for campaign play. Then we've got Chaos Warriors here. So we've got regular Chaos Warriors. This is a tier 3 unit, so it's recruited at the same tier as this one here. This one is, I think, a A-tier unit. This is something that I would prioritize over these two. It's got more armor, more combat potential, this is more leadership. This is a much hardier unit. It is a unit that's way more reliable. If you want a frontline unit, get to tier 3, skip these idiots, and get this one here. It definitely doesn't belong in S tier, but it's a good solid unit for a tier 3 unit. Then we've got the Chaos Warrior with Halberds, and this is a tier 4 unit. Now, because you get it significantly later, because there's a big difference between getting to tier 3 and tier 4, at least with Kairos, not so much with the Changeling, that makes it less convenient. However, bonus versus large is very important for Tzeentch, since your other options are a little bit limited, especially in the early stages of the campaign. But tier 4, that's not early stage of the campaign. So if it had been recruited at tier 3, I might have put it at S. But because it's only at tier 4, I mean, you're getting it later, I'm going to put it at A tier, because by the time you get it, you really sort of needed it, and you're pretty close to getting the next tier right after that. So then you've got the Chosen of Tzeentch. And these guys here are both recruited at the tier 5 Mortal Recruitment Building, and I would say that both of these are actually S tier. Tzeentch really benefits from the Chosen units in their roster, because they've got a lot of durability. You need some frontline. These guys are really good. They've got high leadership, good amounts of armor. If you want to have a backline full of missile units and flamers or whatever, these guys here, you only need a few of them to hold the enemy back for a really long amount of time. These guys here have a very high potential for what they can do for your army, to just hold the enemy back. Obviously, spamming them in your armies may not be the best option, but in terms of what these guys can bring to the table, and that is holding power, there really isn't a better unit in your roster for holding back the enemy for a really good amount of time. A good amount of health, good amount of barrier, they'll really keep them at bay. So very good units there. And I know in the past that I've taken entire giant dumps on Chosen, but you know, that was Warhammer 1 and 2 when there wasn't monogod variants. The Tzeentch versions are quite good. They've got magic. Everyone's got magic attack in the Tzeentch roster, but that magic attack really helps. But also having the barrier, meaning that if they can get out of combat just for a little bit, restoring your barrier basically gives them some form of regen. It's very high value. Okay, then we move on to Cavalry here, Marauders of Tzeentch. Now these ones here are actually pretty good. I'm going to put them as A tier because they've got barrier. They've got, well, everyone's got barrier, obviously, decent amount of barrier. And they've got magical missile attack, so that is quite handy in the early stages of the campaign when dealing with monster units. So this is another unit that you could use for essentially anti-large, harassing monster units. I wouldn't bring too many of them in the late stages of the campaign, but this is just a very convenient unit in the early stages to get. But again, I wouldn't build my entire army based around them. Then we've got the Knights of Tzeentch. So two variants, you know, one with higher stats of melee attack and melee defense, the other one with higher charge bonus. Basically identical units. Similar sort of situation here where they just sort of move the stats around a little bit for different variants, but their utility is exactly the same. I'd put both of these under A tier as well. I've not really been in the past too fond of Chaos Knights, but when you've got barrier, that is really helpful for cycle charging, because one of the big problems that heavy cavalry will face in Warhammer 3, or just any total Warhammer, is that you charge into a unit, and then some of your units get stuck, and it takes a while to get them out of there. But what will happen here is that while you're trying to get your units out from your cycle charge, only your barrier is really taking any damage. You're not losing any entities, giving you a much bigger buffer zone. And then because you're getting out of combat ready to charge again, you get a chance to recharge that barrier. So their utility on the battlefield is significantly higher than other Monogod variants, because you can really just keep cycle charging them if you do it right. Keep cycle charging them endlessly into a backline of infantry, and these guys will never take any damage because you just pull them out of combat. They'll take damage on their barrier, but that doesn't matter so much. So a really strong unit if you use them correctly. But yeah, spamming them in an army, probably a bad call. Another reason why I'm not going to go into S tier for them. Then we've got Chariots of Tzeentch. So Chariots, I don't think that Tzeentch really needs to worry about Chariots. You've got plenty of options here for anti-infantry. So I would say this isn't necessarily a bad unit. It's just that you've got better options. So I'm going to put this one here as B tier. Putting one or two of them in your army for anti-infantry is definitely not a bad thing. They'll dish out more damage than these guys here, but they can sometimes also get taken out a little bit quicker. So that's where I'm going to put them. Then we've got the Doom Knights of Tzeentch. Now, these guys here are essentially flying cavalry. Well, that's exactly what they are. So they're similar in tier to the, I guess, the Pegasus Knights for Bretonnia. Serve the same role. They're very quick. Being able to fly is useful to get away from fast combatants that want to pin you down the ground, but alternately they can also get stuck on the ground. They've got lower entity numbers, so this can sometimes be a very finicky unit. I've seen armies where these have been spammed entirely, and you can actually get some really good use out of it, but also there are certain situations where they kind of flounder or not really do so well. They're not great against single entities. They're mostly good against just like taking isolated units out pretty quickly. So I'm going to put these under A tier there because they're good units, but I just don't think that they can really take the S tier slot. And they definitely don't belong down here. They're decently strong units. Okay, then we've got the Flamers over here. So these are all demons. Right, the regular Flamers of Tzeentch, this is essentially an anti-infantry unit. Really good at just mass killing absolutely tons of units. I wouldn't spam them in your army because this is one of the squishiest units in the game. A strong gust of wind can essentially kill it. I'm going to put it under S tier, because you just should make sure that you protect this unit. Usually what I do with it is mix it in with my my horrors, put them maybe behind it. They will sometimes shoot them and lower their barrier, but since the amount of damage potential this one here can do, it's usually okay at taking a little bit of damage on the guys in front of it. So they're a little bit inaccurate. If you're up against a particularly slow opponent and you're able to move this around the flank, then you can prevent that little issue. But sometimes the enemy have just got cavalry. You should keep this unit very far away from cavalry because they're big, they're large entities. Enemy cavalry units charge into them and almost annihilate them straight away because they've got no melee combat stats. So very high potential unit, but also really squishy. Be very careful about enemy missile units as well. A couple of shots and this unit's dead. So high damage. Essentially, it's a glass cannon. Now, you've got the Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch. Now, this is a single entity, and it actually serves a different role, in my opinion, than the regular Flamers. This type of flame here is better against single entity because it dishes out so much damage in a concentrated area that chucking it into a infantry unit, you just overkill everything that you're hitting. Unless you're specifically targeting, like, elite units. Like, if you're targeting an enemy chosen unit for some reason, then yeah, using this one's fine because these guys have loads of health. But if you're up against, say, Empire Swordsman, no, don't waste your ammunition on this. These guys don't have much ammo, so you've got to be really careful with what you're doing because you could actually end up hurting yourself on the battlefield by wasting your ammunition killing garbage units. So instead, you need to make sure this unit here is always targeting high value units, preferably single entity lords. They're very good at lord sniping. So I'm going to put this one here under A tier. But yeah, once again, don't spam it because these guys are not a one solution to all your enemy forces. Very specific enemies that they're good against. Then you've got the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. And again, I'm going to put this under A tier because it serves the same role as this one here, except it can fly. Now, you could also argue it's actually better than the Flamer of Tzeentch, because you can go directly above the single entity that you're trying to kill and just pop down straight on it. But again, it's a very squishy unit. Just got to be careful with it. And of course, each one of them you have to get a higher tier building to get them. I don't think any of them really warrant the S tier area because they don't serve that sort of essential role in your army. These ones here is really for the most essential positions. Okay, then we've got flying units. We've got the Chaos Furies of Tzeentch. These are not needed units. They're just they're just there because every monogod needs to have a variant of, of Furies, but you just don't need them whatsoever. I'm going to put them under C tier because they're not entirely useless, because they are okay at taking out enemy missile units. That's about it, and maybe pinning things down. This is a unit that will constantly need to be replaced. It's also okay for taking out towers in minor city sieges and major city sieges, but in terms of the actual value that it'll have on the battlefield, this is a unit that you'll want to phase out completely very early on. It just doesn't have a whole lot of value. Then we've got the Screamers of Tzeentch, which is a flying unit that's anti-large, but I just don't think this is a very good anti-large unit. Like, I've sent it into fight cavalry before and they end up losing. So this is one where their combat stats just aren't that good. And they don't really have anything else that they bring to the table apart from anti-large. So I'm going to put this one under C tier. This is a unit that you can go through your entire campaign and never recruit, and your campaign should be fine. It just doesn't feel an essential role, especially considering now you've got the Cockatrice. That's assuming you get the Shadow of Change DLC. So this one here is a new single entity flying monster. Now this is not a demon. So I have found in my campaigns using this unit, because it's the changeling you start off with one of these, that you can actually get a lot of value out of this. Because you don't have to worry about it disintegrating, so you don't have to pull it out as soon as it starts to teeter around low leadership, because if it goes to low leadership and ends up breaking, well, it'll rout and possibly come back. Whereas a demon unit, as soon as it's lost its leadership, it's a dead unit. So this is a unit that you're not going to have to constantly replace. And that's a big thing with these two here. You send them accidentally into the wrong combat and they get wiped out. Now, well, gotta bloody go back to the province to recruit them, assuming that you would even want to. Whereas this one here, it's unlikely in your battles, even if things don't go well, that this unit here is going to get killed. It's got just the right amount of leadership that it'll break of its own decisions, of its own accord, when it is basically out of combat power. It's an armor-piercing creature, so sending this to go and fight enemy lords is actually quite valuable. It's got good combat stats. I think it's a good troop. I'm going to put this one under A tier. I don't think it belongs under S tier. It's not super high tier. I think it's tier 3. Then we've got the Lord of Change. So this is really the key unit here that changes so much throughout the campaign because of your tech tree. So how you get this unit in single player compared to multiplayer will change drastically, especially given all the changes that Tzeentch has gone through over the patches over time. See, originally, the Lords of Change, their spells cost Winds of Magic, which made them really inefficient because they cost more Winds of Magic to cast than the Lords. So why would you ever use their magic? But now they're bound spells, and you can get up to 2 casts with them for each of their spells. And some of these spells are very deadly. So this is definitely an S tier unit. Having access to a unit that doesn't use up Winds of Magic, that is able to cast a Gate of Tzeentch or a Tzeentch's Firestorm, this is insanely powerful. And you can even use it to generate some Winds of Magic using Glean Magic. So a really good unit. And they're okay in melee. They're not great, but they're okay in melee. And they, of course, can fly. So if there's any combat that you don't want them to be in, they can usually get away. They're a little bit derpy in melee, though. Then we've got the Chaos War Shrine of Tzeentch. Now, this is a mortal unit, and this is where utility comes into play. I'm going to put this under D tier. Now, it's not because what the Chaos Shrine of Tzeentch offers is crap, but because this is a redundant, unnecessary unit. You should, instead of recruiting this unit outright, get a hero. So you can get a cultist that can be put onto a War Shrine of Tzeentch. You'll get more use out of that because you can put equipment on that particular character in order to give it missile resistance. Now, in the Warriors of Chaos, in their tech tree, they're able to increase the missile resistance of this unit by a ton, because this unit is going to... Well, actually, I think it's a ward save. This unit is going to get targeted by the enemy. It almost always gets targeted. And that actually lowers its value significantly. And also, the particular bonus that the Tzeentch War Shrine offers is not that big of a deal. Spell Mastery, having your spells being up to 20% stronger, is not that essential. And same with 20% extra recharge rate, considering all the other things that's providing recharge rate. Your core number of Winds of Magic just isn't really high enough to warrant the need of those particular skills. But yeah, like I said, it's not that the War Shrine is bad, it's that you can get other characters to get this as a mount, and so you don't need to actually recruit it itself, because these are characters that you should put into your armies. Obviously not spam them, but having one cultist in your army is very good for all of your armies. You just don't need more than one war shrine, really. So that's why I'm going to put it in D tier. Again, it's not because it's a weak unit. It has a lot of potential, but because it's just unnecessary in terms of the way the campaign plays out. Spamming these units is really bad. You should only ever have one of them maximum in your army, and that one should be a character, again, that has equipment, especially stuff that gives it missile resistance, something that this one here can't get on its own. Then we've got the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. This is a really good unit. Very good at dealing with single entities with its missile attack, and they're pretty good in melee itself. Just an all-around good unit. It can go under S tier there. So there's not really too much to talk about that. It's just good, strong unit. Then we've got the new unit with the Shadow of Change, the Mutalith Vortex Beast. This one here is the best unit in the Tzeentch roster. It goes under S tier and takes the top spot. So if I was to rank all of these, I'd rank them in this order, like that. The Mutalith Vortex Beast is insanely powerful, especially if you're playing as a Changeling campaign. So this is a unit that has a good amount of barrier. It's got a Mortis Engine effect. If you put Echoed Hellbrass attached to this army, you can get some regen, also increase their regen cap. They're anti-large, and they provide a melee attack buff in an area around them. So they're providing, in my opinion, more buffs than a Chaos War Shrine. So if you're looking at the buffs on this one, thinking it's important, wait, you haven't seen nothing yet until you've seen these. These are good in combat. The biggest problem with them, though, is if you go up against an enemy with lots of missile attack, these guys here don't have any missile resistance, so they can get taken down pretty quickly. But they're pretty quick, so they can pin those units down and try to stop them. So a little bit of micro may be needed. But this is an insanely powerful unit. It's also really expensive, but it's actually, in my opinion, really worth it. Even if you only get one of them, because it will make your entire army stronger and just allow you to just get rid of mass amounts of infantry with its Mortis Engine effect. Really strong unit. Of course, assuming you get the Shadow of Change DLC. But anyway, there we go. That's the unit roster. So I think it's significantly different than it was last time we covered it, and we've got new units there. Overall, I think the vast majority of the Tzeentch units are pretty good. Only a few units that I would recommend avoiding, just because I don't think they provide much value. But anything in under A or S tier, you really should think about giving them a shot in your campaign, because they can provide a lot of value. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Really appreciate all the support. Don't forget to check out Manscaped, link in the description and the pinned comment. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.